Thank you so much, Mace and Vicki, and for the invitation. It's just awesome, the chance to be able to speak at my grammar school. I graduated with Betty right there, and Dale right there, and I'm so glad they're here on this really fun night. So I've been speaking about this for almost 11 years, and this is over 200 presentations on the internet and in person and EWTN. And I have a lot of my recordings are just Google, and you can Google Shroud Phillips, and a lot of that shows up. So why did this all start? It started because I raised Catholic, but when I got to Notre Dame, I was a smart aleck, and I thought I knew everything, and my faith started wavering a little bit. And then I met this wonderful lady, my wife, Bridget, who never wavers in her faith. And then I married her, and one day I'm married in '69, one day around 1975, I saw on television for the first time the Shroud of Turin. So I said, I have a woman that I love, I'm wavering in my faith, maybe this is something that's going to kick me in the jaw. So I said, well, the first thing I have to do is convince myself this is not baloney. So I had one way to think about it, and that's with my highest level of education is in allergy immunology. So the shroud just happened to have pollen on it. So I said, all right, so I've been served this on a silver platter, 1975. I'm a doubting, know-it-all physician, okay? So I'm going to really unmask this as a fraud, because I'm going to read everything on the pollen. And I did, and I did not unmask anything. I got convinced it could not be faked. So you're going to see later, there's individual pollen on it that I'm super familiar with, that is in Jerusalem, and then later in Constantinople, and then later in France. Every place the shroud has been, there's sample pollen, no place else on earth but those places. So that convinced me, all right? Then I became a lifelong fan, and I read everything. And then my kids, I not trained them, but coached them in soccer and baseball, and then they all graduated, had a nerve to disappear. So they disappeared, and I had nothing to do, and I said, why don't I give talks? So 11 years ago I started it, and here I am. All right, so what we're dealing with here is obviously a miracle. The resurrection's a miracle, but it's even more. Jesus has left us a sample of what miracles are about. And this sample is the most important part of Christianity. He resurrected from the dead. In my humble opinion, now science is overwhelmingly backing that up. Not that you guys need it, but I bet you have some relatives or some grandchildren that need a little boost. Well, if you get them interested in thinking about the shroud science, they're going to start thinking maybe they should give this Christianity thing another chance. That's why I do this, to pick up the unbelievers and to foster stronger faith from all of us. We always doubt everything, but of course if you're sitting here you probably doubt less. But this little wavering thing is out the window when you hear all these details. So after we get through, I'm going to answer any questions you want until I pass out on the floor, okay? All right. So, I feel truly, now I'm going to divorce myself from my faith just for a second, and I'm just going to become a pain in the neck, know-it-all doctor. All right? All right. So, I think there's scientific proof that the first time in history, as of 2005, and you're going to see why I pick on that date, that the shroud is real. All right. So here's the premise. The premise is either it is or it isn't. It either represents part of the resurrection, where Jesus on purpose left an image for us to secure our lousy faith abilities and make it a little more aggressive and do things better, or is it a medieval fraud? All right? So I'm going to go through all the points of science, and I like to refer to the physicist in the back there, who's an atheist, okay? Hey, John, thanks for following me. I'm joking, of course. But the physicist obviously knows more than me because he's a physicist, not a lowly doctor. But I'm going to say everything that that physicist cannot disagree with, except the conclusion. Every single point I make is irrefutable. I'm not lying to you at all. You're my patient, I'm not lying to you as a doctor. Okay? So hang in there and, remember your questions or write them down. All right, here we go. So who's on my side here? With the popes through history, let's just talk about modern history, the last 20, 30 years. The popes have never come out and said the shroud is real. But my favorite pope is the wily St. John Paul II, who said he believes in it without saying it. Look at the quote. Instead of icons made by man. Well, if you have an icon and it's not made by man, who made it? Okay? So he's saying, without saying it directly, this is an icon not made by man. Let us venerate the holy face of Jesus. So my interpretation of that sentence is, he's saying he believes it's real. All right. So what we're going to see now is scientific elements on the shroud of the Passion, the Crucifixion, and the Resurrection. It's all there in plain English. God slapped us in the face again. Here I am. I did this for you. Here's your proof. All right. Now, what you hear about the shroud on TV is always limited. And you never hear the things you're going to hear tonight. You're going to hear things tonight that will just astonish you, but if CNN or History Channel actually said those in detail, you would be overwhelmed to believe it. So they always leave stuff out. But tonight, nothing is going to be left out. All right, so we're going to begin with the cloth itself. This is a picture of a piece of it, cut off for carbon dating back in 1988. So it's a first century style herringbone weave cloth. Now for this to be 2,000 years old, does that look like old cloth? No, it looks like somebody just did it yesterday. All right, so that's these are just little hints. These aren't the big things, but it looks too new. All right, so what's interesting about it is, as I said, it's linen, it's high quality, which fits the story of the Bible of Joseph Arimathea, the rich person, maybe providing the cloth. Has blood on it, which is extremely important, but number one all is the image. The image is everything, because it's a pixelated photograph 3D image. Did you hear that before? Maybe not. And guess what? We've been trying for a long time, the scientists of the world, to duplicate it, and they cannot. So 2011, I was invited to be a member of the 137 International Shroud Science Group. Those are real scientists around the world. 2 or 3 of us are communication people. That's why I'm in it. So I get their emails all the time, and I keep updating my talk. All right, so let's get a feel for what happened, that the shroud gives us information on what happened scientifically at the moment of the resurrection. All right, so to understand it, we have to understand the image. So the rigor mortis body of a nude Christ was laid on a cloth in the tomb, and the top of the cloth was furled over the top of his body. So when the moment of resurrection happened, the image generates to this piece of the cloth and that piece of the cloth. So it's a front image and a back image. And if it was faked in the time of the Middle Ages, the bishop had to hear from the faker that I have a nice picture of Jesus nude. Would that gone over well? No. All right, so that is a little odd that a person in the Middle Ages would have done such a thing. All right, this is a picture that I took when I went to see the shroud with my wife in Turin, Italy in 2015. There's the guard. And you can see it's a full-length front image, head-to-head, with a back image. So here's the face, the arms, the chest, the legs. You're going to see this a lot better. Just showing you the whole thing. And there's the back of the head, his back, buttocks, and legs, and feet. Now, here's an enhanced computer. I've turned up the gain on the dark side, and you see the front image a lot better with the gains turned up. So it's a 14-foot long cloth, 3 feet wide, which is exactly cubit 8 and 2. So it's cubit measurement where they cut this thing out. All right, now, these are just superficial information. So what do you see? Long beard, burn marks. The burn marks are, the shroud in 1500 was in Lirey, France, and was Chambéry, France, and was in a reliquary, and somebody tried to burn the church down to destroy the shroud. So the fire, the cold, the embers of burning wood dropped on the corners of the shroud that was folded up, and the miracle is it didn't hit the important parts of the image, but it did knock out the shoulders. So these are burn marks that you can ignore, and you can see how it was folded up. So this was all folded up into four sections. All right, now you can also appreciate, without me showing you a better picture yet, of scourge marks all over the front, back. Water stains are them trying to throw burn out the fire. The fact that he's nude and there's blood coming out of his wrist, coming down his arms, all over his face, chest. And this is really interesting. See if you can pick this up. Because of the position, the cloth is touching his knees, but he's in rigor mortis, so the back of the knees are about 4 or 5 inches off the cloth. So the energy that came out of that cloth at the moment of resurrection cannot go through that much distance. It couldn't go 5, 6 inches. So the back of the knees don't have any image, it's light. But the touching part of the cloth of the knees, you can see is dark. Can you appreciate that? I mean, it's so far away. Can you appreciate it, or just have to take my word for it? Okay, so you can see how the cloth makes sense for the rigor mortis position. Okay, these are all this tremendous number of details that some guy in the Middle Ages never would be smart enough to do. All right, so where's the shroud been? Obviously in Jerusalem, that's where it starts. We think after the Roman war with the people there in 70 AD, it was whisked out of town for safekeeping to Edessa, Turkey, which is now Urfa, U-R-F-A, and was there from 70 to 944. Now, there's a lot of reasons we're going to explain why, but nobody was taking pictures and proving it, and it wasn't shown to the public. So why would the apostles take an endearing relic of Jesus' crucifixion and show it to the public? Somebody would destroy it, somebody would steal it, so it was in secret until about 500, 600, when artists would come in. It was under the control of the kings, and artists would come in and draw pictures of it. So you're going to see the pictures. All right, so we have that. We have information that it was in Constantinople. I'll prove that to you. Then our guess is from 1204 to 1355, the Knights Templar were in charge of it, because that's all the hidden years where we have no idea where it was. It just shows up in Lirey, France in 1355. So 1204 to 1355, our guess, it's a Knights Templar. And there's some little things along the way that may show that historically, but we don't have time for that. I could talk for 6 hours. All right, so it shows up in Lirey, France, and there it's in white because it's documented, because hundreds of thousands of people were shown the thing, and they wrote about it. So that definitely is proof that was there. Then it makes its way to Turin, Italy, where it's been since 1578. All right, so now we're going to go along the way of history, and we're going to show the little way we can prove it without having anything other than pictures. Painted human pictures done by humans. All right, so the time at Edessa, 70 to 944 AD. So what do we have? We have mosaics. And these mosaics are that time frame, right around 500. And you can see the image of Christ with a long nose, the long hair, the beard, changes from the pre-525, when the shroud wasn't in exhibition. So all the years before, the public thought Jesus was a young guy, no beard, no mustache, clean shaven. All of a sudden, at 525, 550 AD, these things appear. So we think they appear because the king at the time said, we're going to have exhibitions. Now, we're going to talk about this one because this is a 550 AD painting that has almost exact duplicate measurements, what's called points of congruence, from the shroud face. All right, so what is a point of congruence? So if you measure distance on the painting between eye, pupil to pupil, if you measure length of nose, if you measure lip to tip of nose, width of mouth, and you put the shroud right on top of it, it's exactly the same measurement. So nobody painted this picture out of his brain, out of his memory, out of his creation. He was looking at the shroud, and he was one heck of an exact painter. You get my point, right? All right. And this was done in 550 AD. It is exactly 120 points of congruence if you add them all up. He was looking at the shroud. All right? So that's where it was up to 944. 944, the king of Constantinople, Istanbul is a modern name. 944, wanted the shroud. He sent an army over to Edessa and he took it. Give me the shroud or I will kill everybody in your city. So then Constantinople became the owners of the shroud, 944 to 1204. Now, why do we think it's in Constantinople? Because there's a painting. And Bridget and I, when we went to Budapest, saw this painting. So in this painting, it dates to 1196, the time it was in Constantinople, the shroud, and it has details that are just impossible for a human to come up with. The painter didn't come up with this. It's because he's looking at the details of the shroud. But let's go over it. So here we have Good Friday. The body's being anointed incorrectly. I don't think they did it on Good Friday. Father Stephen can help me with that, but I kind of think they were a little late, so they didn't do it. But anyway, that's the painting. And then Easter Sunday, there's no body. The shroud's there, and the women come to, I guess, anoint him again. But he's not there, all right? So it's very strange that this is exactly the right thing that the shroud shows. So let me show you the crazy findings that didn't happen by accident. So why did this painter decide to draw Jesus' hands with no thumbs? Because the Shroud of Turin has no thumbs. The image of his thumbs are missing. I'm going to explain what happened, all right? We also have, he's nude again, so why did he do that? The arms are crossed the same. The long hair is there. Now, he messed up on the beard. You can fight me on that one, all right? Now, you go to the second half of the painting on the lower side, the mathematics of this being a fake is astronomical. This is a herringbone weave, but look at the 4 burn holes that the man put in the drawing. L-shaped 4 circles. How come it matches the shroud, L-shaped 4 circles, so perfectly? How did he invent that out of the clear blue sky? How did he invent no thumb? All right, so I'm convinced that was not an accident. He was looking at the shroud. And there's Bridget and I, September 2018, looking at this Hungarian Prey manuscript. So then it travels on and ends up in where it is now in Turin, Italy. And it was owned by all the kings of Savoy, not the Catholic Church, not the Pope, the kings of Italy for 405 years. Finally, the last king of Italy that had power gave it to the Pope, 1983, willed it to the sitting Pope. So it's just passed on as ownership, Pope to Pope. This is where it is, St. John the Baptist Cathedral. And you can only see it when there's an exhibition, which is about every 15 to 20 years. So it's in right now, a bomb-proof case. Argon gas fills it, not oxygen, because it oxidizes the blood and the color of it. And this is where you go to Turin, Italy now. You can see it behind a glass, kind of a bomb-proof glass, but what's bomb-proof glass anymore? But that's where it is. It's inside of this area with glass here. All right, now we're going to go into the science of what's there. The science starts in 1898, because photography is a science. It's a science of light and capturing light on a photographic chemical plate. All right, so this is the first time science was ever used on the shroud. So they took a picture. So to understand what you're going to see, you have to get a little review on photonegativity. All right, so when you, in the good old days, took your picture on film and took it to the pharmacy and got it developed, your picture came back, you dark, and the background light. Then you would get a print, and you would then be light, and the background would be dark. So this is a photographic negative, and this is a photographic positive. So let's go over to the medieval forger. To get all this right, and to create the image on the shroud as a photographic negative, knowing that in 1898 we would know how to do a photographic positive. He did this in the year 1200 when there was no photography. That's called a leap of faith. So this is the original photographic negative face of the man of the shroud. He is dark because the image is, quote unquote for now, burned on. Background, nothing. So this is a positive image, but because it's reversed, it acts like a negative. So when you go to the dark room and you put a negative of a negative, you get a positive, you get a human face. And that's what they got. So this should make you quite impressed compared to the one before. So this happened in 1898 and went all through the newspapers of the world. You can see teeth, mustache, lack of ears. Oh, he had no thumbs, he has no ears. Oh, he has no cheeks. The medieval painter, he forgot a lot. There's blood in his hair, so hair bleeds, that's interesting. All right, so I hate to be so sarcastic, but this is not a fake. So here we go, medieval fraud, 1290, before photography, photographic negative, photographic positive. All right, then in 1931 the camera gets better, and now you have tremendous detail. Now you can see real clear, except it's too far away, the no ears, the no cheeks, blood in the hair. You can see he died with an expansion of chest. He took a breath in and his heart stopped beating and he didn't breathe out. You can see the right-sided wound where the spear went in. You can see a bloated abdomen of a person who's breathing hard and swallowing air. You can see the nail in the wrist, not in the palm, but in the wrist. So physicians and everybody that has any knowledge of anatomy knows you can hang 90 pounds on one palm of hand nail and 90 pounds on the other palm of the hand nail. It has to go through the wrist or it won't support the body. So the shroud backs that up. The evidence says the nail was in the wrist, because that's where the position is. All right. This is the back. You can see that his hair is a natural style ponytail of the time, of the Jewish people of the time. Scalp blood, not necessarily just on a crown, but all over his scalp. So the crown of thorns was really kind of a cap of thorns. I'll show you some depictions of that. You can see the burn marks again. You can see the blood and water. Now remember, since he's lying on his back, this is gravity pulling blood out of the right side of his chest, mixed with fluid, pleural fluid, which is like water, and now it's flowing evenly across the shroud as it pours out of his lance wound. So you are essentially, if this is a glass table, he's lying down on the glass table and you're looking up, so you can see how the gravity would take this fluid and spread all the way across. So just look at the details that the other alternative to being authentic, of medieval, fake, is just getting out of sight, impossible. There's his knees again flexed. All right? So now nothing happens from 1898 until 1976. And what happened in 1976? America took over. America. Why? Because we had put people on the moon. NASA was famous. The Vatican knew it. They said, America's pretty smart. I think I'm going to let them touch the shroud. So they're the first country on the planet to get permission from the Vatican to do some studies on the shroud. So they had invented, this is how the Pope, I think it was the one before John 23rd. Yeah, Pope Paul got the idea, because NASA had a VPA Digital analyzer that went into the satellites around the moon, and it would send back 3D images of the surface so they know how tall the mountain is, how deep the valley is. And the closer you were to the VP8 and the satellite, the stronger was the image. That's why the top of the mountain gave a stronger image. So this camera was then picked up by the miracle grace of God. Well, let me explain this before I talk about who did it. All right, so here's a picture of a two-dimensional girl put into the VP8 image analyzer. She's two-dimensional, like all pictures we have are two-dimensional. They don't have three-dimensional information. So this is what you get if you put it in the VP image analyzer. You get distortion. There's nothing there recognizable. But if you take the Shroud of Turin and put it in the VP8, as Professor Jackson of the U.S. Air Force Academy, physics professor, did in 1976, the joke is, I went to a meeting once, and he's my hero, so I was talking to him. I said, where'd you get the information, or where'd you get the idea to do that? And he says, I don't know. That was it. But he spent an hour and a half giving me physics. So here's what happened. Whoever said, oh my God, is right. That's a 3D image that a medieval forger figured out. Or this is authentic. So, the America forms a team. There you go, Pope Paul VI. Got permission to do the team, and all these scientists from Los Alamos, Lockheed, IBM, Jet Propulsion Lab, all these people, about 32 of them, got together and flew to Turin, Italy for 5 days and studied the Shroud and put their hands on it and did everything. They did all these specialties were represented by that group of 32. All right, let's talk about their beliefs. 38 were smart aleck scientists, agnostics. Some of them, a couple were atheists. 2 were believers in Christianity. 3 were raised Catholic. 34 raised Protestant. 3 raised Jewish. Jewish on this little scientific trail. And they all arrived thinking the Shroud's a fake. They were just there to prove it, have a little fun in Italy, and that's it. All right? They all left, as honest scientists would say, I don't know if that's Jesus, but it's not a fake. I can't explain how that image got there. And they have a long treatise on all their findings, and there's no explanation they can give other than heat, oxidation, light, and all that. What you're going to see. This is the group, and that's Dr. Jackson. This is when they first had the ability to see the Shroud and touch it. This is some of the equipment they had. All right, and this is where the pollen came in. So when they took samples on slides, they finally got back to America. So I was just going to tell you, this is what got me interested. 3 types are only found in Israel, 14 in the Middle East, 58 in other parts. And of course, this was faked by somebody 376 years before they invented a microscope. This is the pollen. So it's either Gandelia terniforti or it's Helichrysum, but we're not sure. They look so similar. But that's the one that's all the pollen, especially around his head. And Gandelia terniforti and Helichrysum have sharp thorns, bushes. All right, then we look at the blood, and they figured out it's human blood, AB. And just as a little side joke, might have come from Jesus, AB is a universal receiver of blood transfusions. And guess who's the universal receiver? Nuclear DNA strands are found, X and Y chromosomes are identified, mitochondrial DNA is there, but we haven't checked it out to try to do any matching. So we got X and Y chromosomes. All right, another little point that the medieval faker was so intelligent. He didn't just want to have human blood, he wanted to torture the blood first, because he knew we can measure bilirubin 400 years in the future. So tortured blood is high in bilirubin. So if a person is beat up, the red blood cells are getting smashed by getting beat up, while the person's alive, and the red blood cells are breaking down in circulation, and leaking out of them is bilirubin. Bilirubin is a pinkish red color. So the pinkish red color is now saturating the other red blood cells. So they're getting more red, more red, more red. All right, so the medieval forger thought to use tortured blood. This was a Jewish chemist and part of the Stirp team, Alan Adler, that figured that out. That's called hemolysis, breaking up the red blood cells. So the medieval forger in 1290 knew photographic negative, 3D imaging, pollen identification, using blood, not paint, using human blood, and then he thought to torture the blood. All right, now we're going to talk about the chemistry of the image. This is what we know in 1978, 2007. So here's Dr. Jackson looking with a spectroscopy. A spectroscopy is a microscope that analyzes reflected light. So when you reflect light or aim light at something, and it comes back at a certain color of the prism, you can identify which element of the periodic table it is. So they aimed the light at the image of the shroud, and what came back is, that's linen. Not paint, not dye, not pencil, no crayon, nothing. It's linen. All right? So that was a great beginning because it identified there's nothing in the image but the cloth. And this is a microscopic close-up of individual fibers with no paint, that's blood, no paint on them, and fibrils that make up a fiber. This is under visible microscope. This is an X-ray shooting through the image of the man. And the X-ray is not stopped by anything but the blood. So the image on the shroud doesn't have anything in it that stops an X-ray except blood. 3D, finally explained in 2007. All right, hang in with this. Here's the body lying down. There's the lower cloth. There's the upper cloth. So the cloth is touching his toe, touching his knee, touching his hand, touching his chest. But there's gaps here because it's kind of tight on the top where there's not touching. Of course, it's touching along most of the bottom. So we have image creation where there is no touching. So what can do that? Can gases leak out of a deteriorating body? Do they go in a perfect perpendicular line, or do they just spread out like a mist? No. Gases don't do that. The only thing does that is radiation. Some form of light or radiation. All right? So that caused darker, stronger radiation effects or light effects on the areas here which are darker on the shroud, giving it the 3D quality. So the image formed in areas where there was no contact. And here's a typical fiber, and that's where the image resides, only on the very top surface, 1%. It didn't even have the power to go through the entire thread. Of course, it didn't burn the shroud to death. It just fringed it in a pixelated fashion. 5.5 billion pixelations make that picture. And it scrapes right off with a razor. So what is it? Dehydrated flax, dehydrated cellulose. And this is the new ENA Italy excimer laser, almost completely duplicating in 2012 the same effect of the shroud. Those are the pulses and the timing, and they created an image on linen that's the same depth as the shroud, an excimer laser. So, the summary is, what is the image not? Not a painting, not a drawing, not a rubbing, not a scorching, not a photograph, not a bleaching. All right? Now, what about the Bible? It agrees with the Bible really well. So we're going to talk about the Passion, the Crucifixion, and the Resurrection. Scourging, crowning, nailing. Start right out. Here's the scourge marks. Over 120 scourge marks from a Roman flagrum, leather strip with a barbell, lead barbell on the end. All over his back, scalp blood with a better close-up. There's a close-up on a life-size picture of the scourge marks themselves. There's a scourge mark. He fits perfectly into it. And here's the marks all over the head that looks more like a cap of thorns rather than a crown of thorns. And this is a picture of the limb of a Gundelia terniforte. Almost 30 bleeding sites. And this is what we really think the crown of thorns look like. All right, so now he was nailed to the cross. So this is a typical picture we're used to. The nail goes into the palm of the hand, but not really, because this man has no thumbs. 4 fingers, no thumb. 4 fingers, no thumb. Wrist. Now look at that. Look at this. These are 2 blood marks. They're going in 2 directions. So he's hanging on the cross, and he's breathing in, and his hands are in this position, and the blood is dripping in one position, but then he goes down, and the angle changes just a little bit. So the rivulet of blood changes its angle as he goes up and down, trying to breathe on that nail, pushing himself up. So the blood keeps dripping out at different angles. You understand what I'm saying, right? All right. So when the nail goes into the wrist, it hits the median nerve. Median nerve provides the muscles that make the finger muscles contract. So when the median nerve is broken or bisected by the nail, the spasm of hitting the median nerve makes the thumb hide behind the hand and go into spasm. So when the image is created, there's no thumb. All right, so if you look hard enough, and if you have time, you look on the computer, you can see a little darkness in the shape of a thumb that's in the middle of the hand. A little bit hard to see. So that's why it has no thumbs. All right, so I could go on and on and on, but between 1978 and 88, there was over 100 facts, scientific journals, and they all point to no medieval forger did this. So everybody's very happy. Oh boy, this is wonderful. Until Pope John Paul II got courage to say, okay, do carbon dating. It's okay, I'm fine, no problem. So they do carbon dating, and of course, Jesus doesn't make everything simple. So he throws science, which you're going to see didn't work out to be real science. He throws the science of carbon dating at us just to cause us a little stress when we were so happy. So the carbon dating comes back, and these are 3 people of 3 different carbon dating labs. That shroud came out of the ground in 1260 to 1390. That linen was made out of flax in those years, according to carbon dating. All right? Now you're going to see why I'm standing here, because it's wrong. All right, but when it came out, all the big scientists of the world quit doing research for 13 years. But the human beings called faithful Christians wouldn't give it up. So they kept calling all the scientists, and they used to have a thing called mail with a stamp, and writing letters and saying, this is why it happened, this is why it happened, this is why it happened. And the scientists were all, you know-it-all, smart Alecks, and they said, oh, those crazy lunatic people, they're driving me crazy. All their ideas don't make any sense. One day, one of the lunatics, Sue Benford and her husband Joe Marino, proved that carbon dating was a fiasco. Here's how it happened. First of all, she's a nurse. She's not a physicist. He is a Shroud fan, but I think he actually was some kind of religious order before. It's slipping me tonight. I'm getting too old. All right, so anyway, this theory they developed in 2001. Here's why. She got a copy of the original sample for carbon dating. She got a copy of the picture. And she looked under the microscope for this, not the microscope, she looked on the screen of the computer for days and days and days. And all of a sudden it struck her that if she drew a line here, this half looks different than this half. So she had the idea that this half was linen, more perfect woven material, and this half was cotton. That was her idea. It was published in Chemistry Today in 2008. So her theory then is based on International Protocol of the Carbon Dating, which took place. Here's what she proved and brought out for everyone to know. The carbon dating itself, when it was done, was a travesty because STIRP and the United States of America wasn't told it was happening. We weren't invited. All right, editorializing, we were not invited because the Shroud's scientists that live in Turin had their nose out of joint a little bit because America came in and took over all their nice Shroud and took over the science. So they got even with us because they did the carbon dating on their own. No STIRP, no USA. Now, the agreement of International Protocol was they're supposed to take 6 little tiny, smaller than a postage stamp samples. They all agreed it and sent it to 6 labs. They didn't do that. They took 1 sample. They sent it to 3 labs, it doesn't matter much, but they took 1 sample. Major mistake. 6 samples spread all over the place has almost no chance of being wrong. But they took a sample from a bad place. So here you have the bottom of the body and the hands, and the Shroud goes all the way over here. So over here in the Middle Ages, this was cut out for some reason. So of all the places on the Shroud, they took a sample where there was previous damage, previous cutouts, and this, of course, if you're holding the Shroud up to show to people, your fingers and the wind blowing are going to cause the need for some repairs. So their theory then, there was a repair done here, 1500, and the sample was of a repair job. Well, they didn't use linen for repair, they used cotton. That was their theory. So next to the repair site, the Turin scientists on their own, one guy on the planet Earth, made his own decision on where the sample would be. We won't mention his name. All right, so close up now with a microscope. There's the line. These are bright, rectangular, beautiful little white cartridges, I would say, of linen. The spaces are small, and the white is really impressively nice. Over here, it's jagged, it's beat up, and the spaces are very large. So you do appreciate that, right? You can tell the difference between this and this, right? Okay. All right, if you were closer, but just, you can go on the internet and get better shots of this. All right, so this is the thing this is the sample they had. So it was more cotton in it from the year 1500 than there was linen from the year 0 or 30 or whatever. So when you put the two together and you burn it up, you turn it into carbon powder and you carbon date it, you now have 15 and 0 added together divided by 2 is 1215. All right, so this is the exact sample. And this is really telling, if I can get this across to you. All right, so this is one carbon-14 lab, Arizona, Oxford, Zurich, and Arizona had a second piece. So let's just pick on Arizona for a minute. Not that they did anything wrong. So they took this piece of shroud, turned it into powder, and this piece of shroud, turned it into powder, and carbon dated it. So the same lab from the far left of the sample said, this came out of the ground in 1238, and over here the sample said it came out of the ground in 1430. So 4.5 inches across, all of a sudden 192 years disappeared. But there's something wrong with that. That is not statistically clear, and that was shown by computers and high statistical analysis about 3-4 years ago. Totally not statistical. So Oxford said 1246, Zurich said 1376. So the amount left to right is more cotton. And as you get more cotton from 1500, the younger the shroud gets. Okay, so this is accepted by all the shroud scientists of the world now. Now, when this data got to Ray Rogers from the original team, he was the ultimate disbeliever scientist from the Jet Propulsion Lab. And he used all these methods, pyrolysis, mass spectrometry, microscopy, microchemical analysis, and published in 2005 in Thermochyma Actica his findings on whether the shroud was carbon dated because it was cotton in it. So that was his theory. So here's what he actually found. He found threads that were so perfectly put together that a linen thread was sticking together with glue with a cotton thread. That was in the C14 sample. Another piece showed where the linen was tried to be dyed. Cotton is usually white. So they kind of overdid it. And they were trying to match the yellow of the linen. That was in the shroud sample. So basically lots of examples. And his conclusion was the C14 labs were accurate with the material they were given. The sample was flawed. They sampled a reweaving patch. Now that was accepted, and now since, because that was accepted, the scientists got back into action and have done more studies. We're coming to the end now. All right, so our enthusiasm restored. So now we have information on how the resurrection physically, scientifically happened so that Jesus gives us a gift of the image on the shroud. How did he pull it off with our knowledge of science now? All right, so of course it's this hypothesis because we haven't been able to duplicate a man turning into energy. Okay, so I went to the 2015 Shroud Science Group St. Louis, and I was talking to John Jackson, and then I got back on the plane, and I was looking at 2 or 3 different studies and theories on what happened at the moment of the resurrection to make an image, right? So I was hemming and hawing and hemming and hawing, and all of a sudden on my cell phone, the next thing you're going to see is a picture that answered my question. And I fully believe, with a lighthearted little joke, that Jesus told me which one was right. That's me, and that's the head scientist, and Jesus put a halo over his head. So I'm sticking with it. This man is my hero. Jesus told me so. So what did he say? This is what he theorized. Now, to make his theory, he's got a lot of enemies here. All these are requirements that have to fit his theory. He has to have no contours of the body, no outlines of the body, blood in the hair, fine pixelated focus, 5.5 billion pixels. His teeth have to appear through obviously a closed mouth. He has to have no cheeks or ears. Okay? All right, so all that has to be incorporated. So now you have the fact that this man is lying in a tomb with a cloth over him, with blood oozing from his skin into the cloth, becoming one with the cloth in a clot. So if he stands up at the moment of the resurrection, rips the cloth up, all these things, clots are going to fall apart. They're pristine, unmoved clots. They are perfect rivers. Not one edge is affected. So the blood is embedded in the fibers. So in order to get a body out of a cloth without messing up the exact image of the blood, look how exact that is. That has not been broken by a man ripping off a cloth. And there's the wrist again. Undisturbed, pristine clots. So the shroud has another requirement. Other than non-disturbed blood, it has to change positions. It's wrapping in a circle. But the picture is it's a flat photographic plate. So the shroud has to go from circle to flat without ripping the blood. Here's what Dr. Jackson thinks. So back to that same picture. The shroud is on the top. Of course, the bottom I didn't bother drawing in. But during the resurrection, in whatever number of milliseconds, the shroud falls through the disappearing, dematerializing body. Matter is turning into energy, and energy is doing whatever God wants to do with the energy, or reassemble it. He can reassemble it as the glorified body, of course. But who knows what happened at that moment. But this is what happened according to the shroud. So he calls it the fall-through theory. So as the body dematerializes, gravity takes the shroud through the dematerializing body, and as it's falling through the body, the image is created. So it starts out, this is the top of his head, he's looking up, shroud's over the nose and cheeks, the blood is sticking to his cheek and sticking to the cloth that's touching his cheek. All right, but at the moment of the resurrection, the body starts dematerializing. So with gravity, this thing falls down to whatever rate's dictated. And when it reaches this point, the blood is moved from here to here. That's why it looks like it's in his hair. Because when the image is created, it's created when the blood is moving on the cloth into the hair area. So somewhere around here, the amount of mass in the body is starting to run out of mass, so the energy is dissipating, and we don't get any cheek registration or ear registration because the body's mostly disappeared already. So it can't put an image on the cloth. Did I say that clear? Yep. Okay. So the upper cloth falls through the body and generally becomes flat, giving us a photographic image, not a distorted picture of a curve. And then finally it falls all the way through the body, body's gone, shroud has a picture. So what is this? Dematerialization, some backwards form of mass, atomic bomb, blows up and energy comes out. Except this didn't blow up Jerusalem. It just put a little heat on a shroud and didn't even go all the way through the thread. It only went to the surface. So this is what happened in my simple-minded way. All right, so we're going to have questions in a second. So what have I proved to you? I didn't prove 100%, but I did prove, I'm pretty sure, that a dead human body vacated the shroud, that a dead human body affected an image on the shroud, that we don't have 100% evidence the body was Jesus, but we do know this man had scourging, crown of thorns, and lance inside. Fits the crucifixion. We also will never have 100% evidence, me talking as a scientist doctor not lying. We'll never have it, because the only way to get 100% evidence is we have to match the DNA on the shroud with a sample from Jesus, who shows up in the lab and gives us a fresh DNA sample. I think we'll be waiting a long time for that. So we have that element of faith that has to take us to 100%. Even though I showed you just a little small amount of details that are not explainable. All right? So, what is the purpose of all this? My opinion, return people over 30 to the faith, help the youth keep their faith, and bring new faith to everyone. That's my opinion. And this is what the shroud is. So, I thank you very much, and I have the floor open to questions.